I did my presentation over Shutter Island. Um, a little bit about the movie. It has a lead character of Leonardo DiCaprio. In the beginning of the movie, he's featured on a ship heading to Ashcliffe uh, Mental Institution, and it would appear that um, he is a U.S. Marshal. And throughout the movie, he keeps referring to himself as a U.S. Marshal, um, and that uh, he is there to investigate the disappearance of a lady named Rachel Solando. Um, so, to uh, give a little bit more on this, he is there at Ashcliffe, and he keeps having these um, like flashbacks, um, and also nightmares. It pertains to um, different things like being in the war and uh, his wife. And sometimes his daughter, who is deceased, is also featured in these flashbacks and nightmares. Throughout the movie, his wife uh, is seen talking to him at different points, rather whether he is perhaps in a flashback or he is moving throughout the Ashcliffe mental institution. Um, he is seen talking to her a lot. Towards the end of the movie, she is trying to guide him into not going to a certain building. And there is uh, different parts throughout the movie that kind of piece it together that he is not actually there as a um, sorry, he is not actually there as a U.S. Marshal. Um, he is seen, um, like it all comes together that he is actually uh, there as a patient in the end. And so, um, what led up to him becoming a patient, though, there was the fact that he had come home one day and his wife, he couldn't find the wife in the house, couldn't find the children in the house. He had seen that she had went out to, she was out near the lake. She's sitting swinging. He realizes there must be something wrong, so he goes out there towards her. He realizes that the children are floating in the lake. And so he gets their bodies out of the lake and um, is just very distraught. Obviously, that is a huge traumatic event that has occurred. His children are gone. His wife is the reason that they're deceased. And so he does kind of confront her um, over the issue simply by telling her this line that if she ever loved him, she would be quiet. And so it's kind of at that point where it doesn't show it, but it's very much implied that he shoots her. And um, and she, of course, dies from the gunshot. And then he, of course, um, has a lot of, trauma from this whole thing. He's lost his wife, his kids. But prior to that, he had had trauma from the fact of being in war. He saw uh, a lot of bad things that had took place in the war with Germany. He had to participate in shooting POWs, and um, so to get into this about the other pieces to this presentation, um, obviously, like I said, it's over Shutter Island. Um, I I really strongly believe that his character, whose name is actually Andrew, is suffering with PTSD. So a little bit about PTSD. Obviously it's been since the beginning of wars. That's a very traumatic experience to have to go through. If you've never gone through something like that before, that would be very, very traumatic. And so in World War I, it was known as shell shock, which I had heard that a lot, like growing up. And so um, my mom had told me about uh, her uncle who served in, um, I guess actually he served in World War II. But anyways, carries over to World War II. It just takes on a different name known as battle exhaustion, but also known as war neurosis, cardiac neurosis, or psychoneurosis. Um, so, but in the Vietnam time, they uh, had a group of people who went by the National Vietnam Veterans Readjustment Survey, and they really did a lot of studies, did a lot of research on PTSD, and that really brought it to light about um, about the disorder. It helped to get it classified, but I think too it also helped to show that it's not just those who go to war. It's those who suffer with any type of traumatic experience. And so in 1980, they added it to the DSM, and um, so the DSM-5 criteria to meet the PTSD, you've got to. I mean, it's very uh, it's very complex, and so um, there's different criterion. So there's an A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So in criterion A, I I said that he had direct exposure. My character had direct exposure to death, and that was as evidenced by being a soldier in the war against Germany, shooting POWs, and finding his children dead after being murdered by their mother. For criterion B, it talks a lot about like unwanted or upsetting memories. And then I said that he's having nightmares as evidenced by traumatic exposure. And then flashbacks as evidenced by seeing, he's having these flashbacks of seeing his dead wife and children and, just different parts of being in the war. And so in criterion C, this is about the avoidance of trauma-related stimuli. So I said that It was trauma-related thoughts and feelings, as evidenced by that Andrew doesn't want to believe that his children are dead and his wife is not dead. Throughout the movie, he doesn't ever come out and just directly say my kids aren't dead or my wife's not dead, but it's like he's avoiding the situation. There's a lot of avoidance happening. So, um, for criterion D, this is about negative thoughts or feelings that begin or worsen after the trauma. So I said that he definitely has difficulty experiencing positive affect, as evidenced by Andrew is increasingly pessimistic about everything in life, and negative affect, as evidenced by the anger and irritability that he shows throughout the movie. When confronted with different situations, he gets very upset and hostile. Criterion E, I said that this was irritability or aggression. He does a lot of risky or destructive behaviors. And so I would say that this is evidenced by the fact that he is not taking his medication, because obviously he's a patient at this facility, not a U.S. Marshal like he thinks he is. And so he's got enough of his meds, and he's having a lot of, I believe, are withdrawal symptoms from one, not being on the meds, two, he's having a lot of PTSD issues, and then so this is leading up to the risky or destructive behaviors. In criterion F, this is about have the symptoms lasted more than a month. And so these definitely have lasted much longer than a month. They it is revealed that he is it is revealed that he is at this facility. Okay, sorry about that. So like I was saying, it was revealed that he was at this facility for about 2 years. And so these have definitely been lasting a lot longer um, uh, than a month. And so criterion G has to do about social and psychological, like social and occupational um, interference. And so he definitely has this. He's unable to keep a job due to the psychological break that he had. He ended up in Asheville. And so he's not having a lot of social engagements as well. He's unable to hold down that social aspect. And so then criterion H has to do about um, was there any other illness leading up to this? And so it doesn't necessarily come out and say it, but I would say no. That leading up to having PTSD, he didn't have any other, he didn't display any other illnesses, and he didn't have any medical issues that were said, and he was not taking any substances. Um, so, uh, with that being said, um, let us move into the other pieces. Sorry about this. I have to move my computer. Um, so, looking at this from the multipath model, um, looking at it from like a biological standpoint, it's having PTSD really makes you have a lot of fear and a lot of stress. You can be set off by um, different uh, different things that different memories can trigger you, and so um, you can experience just a lot of like nervous system issues. Um, I so the amygdala. Um, this is part of the fear-producing stimuli, and it's part of the brain that is involved in threat detection and is a major interface between events occurring in the environment and psychological fear responses. The amygdala has multiple connections to regions of the prefrontal cortex that are concerned with attention, managing emotional reactions, and anticipating events. Um, in a response to potentially dangerous situations, the amygdala sends out a signal to the prefrontal cortex, and this is where the sympathetic nervous system comes into play. Um, and so that has to do a lot with like the fight or flee. And so, and then there is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And so, this is the system involved in stress and trauma reactions. It can release hormones of epinephrine or cortisol. These hormones prepare the body for the fight or flight by raised blood pressure, blood sugar levels, and heart rate. The body, once it becomes evident that the danger has passed, and the fight or flight response is dampened. Um, and so our book talked about fear extinction. And so um, it said basically that people with PTSD, they exhibit, minimal fear extinction. Their trauma-related fear responses do not decline with the passage of time. This impaired fear, inhibition, and difficulty discriminating safe situations is a hallmark of PTSD. Um, so in people who showed the least fear extinction before deployment, prolonged reactivity to a fearful stimuli, or they would have more prolonged reactivity to a fearful stimuli, where the most likely or were the most likely to exhibit PTSD after returning home. Um, Researchers believe that uh, deficiencies in fear extinction occur when oh my god, I can't read. The medial prefrontal cortex is unable to adequately inhibit fear responses. So looking at it from a psychological standpoint, people that have PTSD, they exhibit a lot of anxiety and negative emotions. I wish this character definitely had that. He had a lot of negative and um, a lot of anxiety. He showed a lot of hostility and anger. He definitely had a lot of rumination. He would think very often on the situation that had occurred. Um, but he strongly believed that he was still a U.S. Marshal. And so it also says that people with this have poor thoughts about themselves and dysfunctional thinking about the world around them. Social is looking at like support systems. In this case, he really didn't have a support system anymore, um, as his family was gone, and he was living in Ashcliff. So his support system was built around doctors and nurses and um, people like that. So from a social cultural, um, I put in here about race-based discrimination. Um, I I'm not sure that that really pertains to this situation with this movie. I think, and I put in here that women are twice as likely to suffer with PTSD, which is true, um, but I think it's due to the fact that men are least likely to want to talk about things. They don't necessarily come out and tell that they've suffered from a traumatic experience. And then how to treat PTSD. I said medications. There are medications out there to help with the symptoms of PTSD, and then psychotherapy. I found that CBT, EDMR, and prolonged exposure therapy would be the best course if you were taking a psychotherapy route. Um, so I also said that he has a issue with alcohol use disorder. The history on this, of course, alcohol has been around for several centuries. It was first noted, though, in 7,000 to 6,600 BC. But in 1952, that's when they added the in the American Medical Association, they added they formally added um, alcohol use disorder. Um, but it wasn't until 1967 that it was really seen as a complex disorder. And so then when the American Psychological Association added it to the DSM-3, uh, you would see that there would be changes happening that occurred in the DSM-4 and 5. Um, and so the changes that happened was how they um, viewed alcohol use disorder. In the DSM-4, it was two disorder. I mean, it was two disorders that were merged into one. I'm sorry, for the DSM-5, it was two disorders that were merged into one. In the DSM-4, it was described as two distinct disorders as alcohol abuse and alcohol dependency. And so the criteria and categorization of this disorder is that there has to be large amounts, or you could have large amounts of alcohol used. That's what I said for this particular person. My character is that he was drinking a lot and he had strong cravings or desire to use alcohol. Um, and then this is listed as substance related and addictive disorders in the DSM-5. Looking at this from the multi-path model, um, it is a like hereditary influence play a part, the dopamine reward. So, if you're suffering, with an issue and you're, um, trying to find that gratification of something, so you're drinking, it plays a part into the mind that it's like a reward. But the hereditary influences are that You know, if your parents are alcoholics, it's a good chance you're going to be an alcoholic. It does alter the brain chemistry, and it does have a dependency. And so, looking at this from a psychological standpoint, a I wouldn't say a lot, but there are people who self medicate with alcohol, and um, it's a good chance that in this movie and for this character, he was self medicating from the PTSD symptoms that he was experiencing. Um, and then, of course, it can cause you to have stressful emotions. And so, looking at it from a social aspect for this character, I think that there's a lot of social pressures during the time that this movie would have took place was 1954, I believe. Um, Alcohol was still a big part. A lot of people drank. A lot of people um, had a tremendous alcohol issue. If we were looking at it from a socio-cultural perspective for this character, cultural norms, I think played a big part. It was very culturally acceptable to drink in excess, but also that's how you deal with, what is happening in your life. Um, you just drink it away because back then men were not necessarily allowed or expected to talk about their feelings. And yeah, so how to treat alcohol use disorder. Obviously, there is AA, where we should all be familiarized with AA, and then learning to control your drinking. Um, as somebody who had an issue with alcohol, I can say that learning to control um, drinking is a huge helpful part of, getting away from having an alcohol use disorder. So, and then these are my references.